If someone asks you, are you leading yourself from within? What would your answer be? Well, if you don't know the answer to that, you might by the end of this podcast. Today, I have Greg Woodard, who wrote a book just on this topic called Leadership from Within. So, Greg, welcome to the show. And why don't you introduce yourself to everybody and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, Bobby, it's great to be here, and thank you very much for the invite. A little bit about me. I'll take less time than if I could go on and on and on about different things in my life, but I'll tell you the basics. I've been married for 27 years, have two grown children who are both flourishing as young adults. I have a grandson. Those are the most important things. I spent 22 total years in the military. I did 7 years enlisted between the Marine Corps and the Army National Guard. I spent then 15 years later on in my life in the Navy chaplaincy, where I served Marines and sailors. I am a spiritual director in training, author. I just finished writing a book, as Bobby mentioned, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Well, first of all, thank you for your service and serving this great country and for probably all the great work you did in every aspect of that career. So thank you as a Army vet myself. I want to acknowledge that before we get started. So your book is Leadership from Within. And so you're obviously talking about leadership from within. Before we get started talking about the nuances and the parts of the book, what do you think most people get wrong in this regard? And where does leadership actually start for most people?
Well, you can tell by the title of my book, Leadership from Within, that I think leadership starts from our inner self, or should start from our inner self. I think not all leaders start off building the external, but I think that's one thing that can go wrong with leaders if they start looking too quickly at the external rather than the internal. I've often said that I've had this phrase in my book: never let your success outpace your character. You know, I have a lot of young leaders that I spend time with and that I sit in pastoral leadership with, and super gifted people. And if their success outpaces the character, then they end up in a bad place. I've always said to leaders that I want them to leave when they want to leave, not because they have to leave. And that's an important dynamic in any institution. I think also some young leaders say yes too often.
Mm.
They want to accelerate their career, so they just say yes to every opportunity. And they maybe don't take enough time to really evaluate what they're doing. Is what they're doing in alignment with who they truly are and who God wired them to be? So say no more often, build your character, and don't let the external trappings be what draws you into whatever it is you're saying yes to. Those would be the things I would say to young leaders.
No, that's very sage advice. And I think the earlier we learn that leadership begins with self, obviously this is the self-leadership lab. We focus a lot on self-leadership, but truly, if we can't lead ourselves, we can never lead others. So that's really good advice, especially saying no to people. So in this whole concept of this leadership and what you said that you're experiencing or that you've witnessed with young leaders, we often in society today, there's a lot of burnout and a lot of dissatisfaction. Why do you think so many leaders are finding themselves burned out in today's society?
Well, I mean, I've said a couple of them already. They mean well. They want, here I am, obviously not a young leader anymore, having spent my time as a young leader, but I'm in a different phase of my life. So it's easy for me to say, don't say yes to too many things. But, I think it behooves a young leader to really take time to evaluate who they are as people, who God created them to be. They need to look at their personality. They need to look at what they truly desire in their life. It might be well for a young leader to, now this is going to sound a little bit morbid, but it might be well for a young leader to sit down and write their obituary. What would they want people to think of them after they've passed? because if they do that, then it helps them to dial in, what is it that I can say yes to and what should I say no to? Um, so related to burnout, I just think, we tend towards people pleasing. There's this concept, true self, false self, that's a Christian concept. And uh, we project an image of ourselves that the world wants to see, and that might lead into this people pleasing. And we aren't taking stock of who we truly are. We're living according to the world's expectations of us rather than our own. Um, we're not leading from a place of authenticity. When we people please, we're going to do things that are going to create an environment where they like us. And, of course, it's good to be liked, but is that really the way that we want to live our lives according to other people's expectations, or do we want to live our life in accordance with how we are truly wired as people? And that calls for self-leadership. The title of your podcast is, Self-Leadership Lab. And you really have to lead yourself well. And one of those things is really knowing who you are and being able to say no to more things than you say yes to. Those are all things that I think lead to burnout.
Yeah, no,
There's a lot of other things that we can say too, but those are the things that come to mind.
yeah, I mean, not to keep harping on the same thing because I've said it before, but I heard it once say that when you say yes to one thing, you say no to many things. But if you say no to one thing, you say no to one thing. And that's so glossed over, I think, because you hear people say yes to less things and that sort of thing. But as a leader, and especially and what we're going to talk about, the whole concept of your book, taking care of all elements of your life, the more you say yes to something, the less time you have to go and invest in this. And I'll also say too that obituary thing that you said, I've heard that as like a coaching tool to kind of find your values, but I've never thought about it before as leadership. Like, if you had to write an obituary for your leadership, what would you want your life to be? Can you just expound on that a little bit more for me? Because I really like that. And I just kind of want to learn more myself on what your thoughts are on either one of those two things, but it's certainly the obituary on your leadership style.
On your leadership style. So, I mean, I guess you could couple it to when I think about I think about my dad. My dad died when he was 63, and that's been many years ago now. And my dad left a legacy. So I look at his life and I've tried to emulate the way that he lived his life. And it took me really, frankly, until after he died to realize how much of a legacy he had left. As far as leadership, I have I have this weird, maybe it's not so weird, maybe it's not so strange to your listeners, but I've learned how to lead by simply not doing what leaders have done in my life. I've had more than my share of toxic leaders. And so many of the lessons that I've learned about how I lead both professionally and at home is um, just don't do what they did. And I could list a handful. I'm not naming names. I'm not going to do that, but I have them in my mind and I can picture all of them. And it's just not, that's so, when I look back now, is that what they want when they were leading me? They don't want to be remembered as that toxic leader. But three of them, I can think of three in particular that are toxic. I have two that went into moral failure. And that's the way I remember them. And I mean, I'm not saying that people can't find redemption. Don't get me wrong. But that's a postmortem on ineffective leadership. When somebody looks back and sees them as the paragon of everything you don't do in a leader. Is that the way you want to be perceived and remembered after you have either left the organization or that person whoever you're leading has left, has gone on to a new environment? I'm thinking of my military life. We would rotate after 2 or 3 years in a tour. Do we want those people who are leaving to remember us as that leader that I don't want to be, or and I also have, fortunately, many leaders who I want to emulate, and I much prefer remembering leaders for their positive traits. than rather than their negative traits. And that's what we all want as people. We want to be seen as somebody who offered value to other people, not that we were people that took from other people. Those are just a few
Yeah.
things I would think about.
No, I really like that. And the only point I would add to that is, when you have leaders like that you don't want to emulate and you don't want to follow in their steps, sometimes that's a really good way to develop your own self-leadership because instead of knowing how you want to lead, you know how you don't want to lead. And then you can lead yourself in ways to not reach that and not be that person. And you can work on it and start identifying the things. And speaking of identifying, in your book, you break it down into four rhythms of leading from within. So you have relational, spiritual, emotional, and physical. Why did you choose these four of probably all the vast ones you could have chosen?
Yeah.
Why these specific four?
Well, there are several more that you could choose. I spoke with one leader who said, well, you should add intellectual. And he's right. So why did I choose these four? Well, it's my book is rooted in a deployed experience. I was on board a naval ship located not too far from where we live, and we deployed for 7 months into the area of operations in the Middle East. And it was the kind of ship, the size of ship. There was one chaplain on board, and that was me. And other than medical and dental, I was the only care provider. I mean, they're offering care in a different kind of way. I was the one looking after people's souls. The chaplain is a representative of the divine. We provide religious services to the crew, and I was I'm not a trained therapist, and people that have experienced my quote unquote counseling over the years know that I'm not trained, but I did a lot of counseling and learned a lot in that environment. So, and then I think too, when you're the care provider, and I don't say this with any animosity toward anybody, but not very many people ask the care provider how they're doing, nor did I expect it. But I did try to proactively reach out and find people who would check in on me periodically, or I'd just go find, that's that relational connection. I'd go find somebody that I could have a peer conversation with that wasn't talking to me as the chaplain. And I had a handful of those. So those were the four areas that were the most important to me. I was a professional spiritual advisor, a religious provider. But I needed to make sure that I wasn't just doing spirituality for other people. I was doing it for myself. So that was one key. Physical, I needed to make sure I was taking care of myself through exercise, eating nutritiously, sleeping well. Deployed environments sometimes strip away opportunities to sleep. I felt like I needed to make sure that I maintain a good routine of sleep. I had different kind of duty assignments than typical crew member. So I took care of myself by sleeping well. Emotional, I had to check in on myself. Like I said, there weren't too many people that were asking me, how are you doing, chaps? Once in a while, my commander would pull me in and say, hey, how you doing? And sometimes my peer friends would say the same, how are you doing? Or once in a while, I'd have a supervisory chaplain that would fly onto the ship and he'd pull me aside and ask me how I was doing, but not too often. I had to do it proactively. So that's my emotional self. And then in the book, I talk about some emotional intelligence that's more like the dynamic of how we relate to other people. And then what did I leave out? So I talked about relational, I talked about emotional. I think I talked about all of them. Anyway, those were the four that were the most important. And then there were some things that I didn't include in the writing process because like the intellectual, I sort of do that naturally. I spend a lot of time reading and thinking deep thoughts. I'm an introvert, so I didn't write about it. Maybe sometime I will. And there's a handful of others, but that experience, I look back on that deployment. I had a lot of, it was hard, and any deployment is, and I wasn't perfect, but I generally maintained my resilience. And so as I look back on it, and then later on, I got to do a doctoral dissertation that helped me to further unpack the dynamic of how I completed that deployment with some level of success. and then I unpacked it even more in the book. So that's how I came to those four rhythms. Those were the four most important things to me during that experience.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. And there, and leave an intellectual out or whatever your friend told you is fine, because I think that's elements of all of them. But no, these are very very, and we're going to unpack like briefly on all four, because to me they all resonate. So we're going to first start with relational, that rhythm. And in your book you talk about leadership as is a team sport, but yet in my observation, I find that when people climb the ladder, the less it becomes about team, and they've kind of started feeling isolated as they rise to the top. So explain your view of the relational, easy for me to say, rhythm here, and why it is so important to leaders, especially in the situation that you drew from, where you were like you said, the only one in that kind of command, and you were responsible for essentially everyone on the ship, regardless of their duty.
Yeah. So yes, I did have a lot of that, my own personal experience of feeling somewhat isolated because of my role. Um, but I think as I have 22 years of military life, so I've seen as leaders rise, the people that can ask them the hard questions or that can speak truth to them becomes fewer and fewer, and it depends on the leader. If my opinion is that a strong leader who's got a level of self-certainty, which a leader should have, they're going to invite people into their life to be able to ask them the hard questions, and they're not going to be combative when somebody asks or points something out. And of course, subordinates have to do that respectfully. But there are always, whenever you're in any kind of hierarchy, there are people below you that are depending on you succeeding as a leader. You might be driving sales in the organization. You might be leading a command. You might be leading in whatever environment. And there's some financial connection between you as a leader and your subordinates. So they're gonna. It's common that subordinates will shy away from asking some of those harder questions. And as you grow as a leader, there are fewer people that are in your peer group. The military is a hierarchy, and as you go up the triangle, you start with a very wide base. As you go up the triangle, it narrows down towards the top, and there's one senior leader in the command, and then that senior leader has one or two people that he or she is reporting to. So there's very few, and that's by nature of the way the military, not always, but is a meritocracy. So fewer and fewer people rise to those higher levels. So those are I think things that are part of it. Maybe at some point we get into some of the antidotes to that, but that's why I think so many leaders get isolated. They don't proactively seek out people that can speak into their lives in a holistic and helpful way.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I know personally for me, the older I get, the more I see the relationships being so important, because I never rose to the level you did in the military. I was always in that like kind of that base layer where I was a part of a squad and platoon and all that. So I always had people around me. So it was a lot easy to build relationships, right? There wasn't the command challenges and stuff that you speak of. But as I get older, I find from a leadership's perspective, even my peers now, a lot of times when you get together, it's not relational in the way that kind of feeds your leadership or your soul or your within, because
Right.
you're talking about business or you're talking about other things. And I think what you were saying earlier about just checking in on people, that's something I'm really working on, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Just getting that circle around me, even if I only see them once or twice a week, or a phone call, even a text with today's technology, how critical that is to my self-leadership, my personal well-being, and my overall leadership.
So the having a circle of people. So there's a writer and speaker named Ariana Malloy, and I heard her talking on a podcast about having a personal board of directors, and she has proactively, she seeks them out, and regularly invites new people in. People have to leave for whatever reason. But these are people, and they don't all meet together. She's not sitting with 15 people on her personal board of directors at any given time. But she's meeting with a handful of them on a regular basis. She listed everything from just pure friendships to people that are therapists, spiritual directors, peers. If I had peer chaplains that I would talk to, I had supervisory chaplains. But she said that this personal board of directors are empowered to offer unfiltered truth into the leader's life. This group is not impressed with the title or cachet the leader has. They are concerned with the inner life of the leader and remind the leader to live with prevention in mind rather than picking up the pieces after failure. So this is a group, and she has private conversations with these people, and she really talked through a checklist of things that she asked them to ask her about, and these are all things that it's unfiltered. They're enabled and empowered to ask her anything, and well, then the key is she has to be honest when they ask her these hard questions. So I think that's a great way, and you can do that in a professional environment too. You can't disclose and be vulnerable in the same way to everybody. I mean, leaders are leaders, and we understand that command structures are real, but there are a handful of people that you can find, and I'm biased. I spent 15 years as a chaplain. We provide confidentiality, and any kind of a helping professional, a therapist, a spiritual director, a chaplain, a pastor, it's going to offer some kind of confidentiality so you can share it. But one of the key things is you just want people that aren't impressed by your titles. They couldn't care less who you are as that's not the right way to say it. They aren't impressed. I'll just leave it. They aren't impressed by your titles. They don't care about the last sermon you preached, speaking as a clergy, or they don't care about the last book you read, or they don't care about the last convention that you spoke at. They're saying, how is your inner self? How is your soul? And I very rarely ever had people ask me how my soul was. And that's the kind of people that we need in our lives. And that's the kind of people that leaders need to invite into their lives. If they can do that, then they're going to have a better than average chance of avoiding the failures that seem to be so prevalent in our societies with leaders.
I like that. I might have to start but two things I think I might start. My board of directors, get that established, because I like that honest feedback, and it does keep you grounded and humble, and always, looking for those elements of your life that you can improve. And then, I'm going to start asking people how their soul is, and just see what happens there. I know we're both men of faith, and so we kind of get the biblical meaning there, but it really that super resonates to me, because one of my aha moments in my life was, if a man gains the whole world but loses his own soul, well, I, from the outside, I had looked like I had gained the whole world. I was being successful, climbing the ladder, doing all the things that externally look great, but then when I looked deep in my soul, I had lost it. And so, again, I know that's relational, and it's kind of, it came up in that conversation. It's more in the spiritual, which is a good segue over to the spiritual, and that element of it. So a lot of people talk these days about finding their purpose or finding their calling in life, and they want it to be done like overnight so they can start this new course of action. In your book, you talk about something that unfolds over time. Can you discuss that a little bit more, and your thinking on that, to help people in finding their purpose and calling in life?
Yes, I can. I just, young, well, this is a general statement. Okay. So forgive me, listeners, if I'm stepping on toes. I'm not meaning to, but I think sometimes young, especially young, and I put myself in this category. We think we know who we are, and we think we're going to live the dream that we're going to live, that we have, and it's just all going to work out, and we're not going to have any hardship, and it's going to be a smooth path towards success in whatever endeavor that we have. And then life hits us, and we have to make a course correction, or we get knocked down and we have to get back up, or we have an illness that becomes um, very significant and we have to recover from it. And we might live with the after effects of that illness, or we have a financial meltdown, or the organization. I mean, I could go on and list all these things that are possibilities. It's sort of like a young married couple. They first get married. My experience is that every one of them thinks they can conquer the world. And they're going to conquer the world together, and they're going to go out there and they're going to be on the upswing the entire time of their marriage. And then they have their first argument. Yes, young people, young married couples do argue, and they're going to have that. There might be something tragic like having a hard time having a child, or at some point maybe the child has some struggles that the parents have to navigate, or all the other things that I just listed, just in general. That life, it's like the dream collides with reality, and then the dream begins to get nuanced, and then it becomes something a little bit different. Still the dream, but it's a little bit different because there's a little bit more reality that's part of that dream. So and that's the same as you asked the question about purpose. I think that there probably, in most cases, there's some kind of innate sense of like, I think this is who I am. But most of the time, again, speaking generally, people don't really know who they are. You might know that you're more wired towards introversion or extroversion. You might realize that spending a lot of time with a lot of people wears you out. Being alone, energizes you, or the reverse. I'm an introvert, so I speak as an introvert. Or you might, I think as you unpack your childhood has an impact on the way you find your purpose. People that have a strong attachment to their primary caregiver are wired by circumstances, and I know it's the reverse as well. People that don't have a strong attachment to their primary caregiver, they're also wired by their circumstances. And then they find healing, and then they move towards their purpose. If we aren't whole as people, we might have a misunderstanding of some of our purpose. We might be pursuing the wrong things. So that sounds very complicated, and it sort of is. I just think it's important to understand that purpose unfolds over time, and I unpack it more extensively in the book. But just don't be in a rush. Just take the time and really dial into who you are as a person. I mean, look at how many majors so many people have in college. I have people in my life that have had four or five majors, and they're not even working in the field of their major now that they're out in the professional world. And that's not a bad thing. It's just things change over time, interests change over time. We mature. Remember, I'm a guy, you're a guy. Our prefrontal cortex doesn't fully form until we're 25. So men, we mature slower than women. And so, once you get married, that changes the dynamic. There's a lot of different factors. So that maybe is discouraging, but purpose is found slowly. And I think that's the best way for us to find our true purpose.
Yeah, and I'm one of those people. My undergraduate degree is in tuba performance, so music conservatory. Yeah. When I was an 18-year-old boy, yeah, I thought that was my purpose, was to be a tuba player. And then now today, I do consulting, coaching, writing, podcasting. So yeah, your purpose does change. But it's because we do all evolve over time, our thinking and what our desires are. And I firmly believe that, none of that time's wasted, because it puts you in a position, gives you the empathy, gives you the perspective, the objectives that you take into the next thing. But, ultimately, like your purpose, and since we're in the spiritual rhythm here, I think as long as you have kind of the spiritual practice and a spiritual belief, that can guide you. And why do you think like a spiritual practice of spiritual belief is really important in both finding your purpose, but then also, guiding yourself as a leader.
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier today, and one of the visuals that I've used for a long time is this idea of a crucible pot. Life, all those things that I just talked about that are challenging, it could be considered to be a crucible, and some experiences that we have in life are more challenging than others. A crucible pot. So I'm thinking about it in relationship to gold. Gold has to be heated to, I looked this up, 1,948 degrees to separate the dross. So the gold is smelted, the dross rises to the top, the smelter scrapes the impurities off, and then it's pure gold. If that crucible pot doesn't hold together at almost 2,000 degrees, that gold is gonna crack, and the gold's gonna flow out onto the floor, and the gold is not purified. So, to your question, why is it important to have, I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but how does spirituality play into this? Well, I think part of spirituality in the sense of a Christian. There's hope for a future. There's hope for eternity. There's hope. Christ provides hope in our lives. And when we live through painful experiences, it doesn't minimize or take away the pain of the experience. I have maybe too many to name experiences that I have lots and lots and lots of questions about, where I was pretty angry. I was mad at God. I've had those kinds of experiences. And my dad died was a time that was one of those. And I've had some while I was on active duty. And I think, if we have a sense of hope, the container of our life is stronger. And when we go through these painful experiences, we're going to bend, but hopefully not everybody lives with this kind of experience. But I've had a lot of experiences where I've bent, but I haven't broken, and I'm not purified. I'm not a saint, but over time, that container has stayed stronger, has grown stronger, and I've been able to allow God to, not I, something in my life has created an environment where I can receive some of those painful experiences as opportunities for growth and not as things that can break me. I don't know if I really addressed your question, but that's at least a first shot.
No, I think it's a good summary of that, and you did answer my question because I do find that like your spiritual rhythm will help your self rhythm and your self leadership and all leadership because you don't always have to rely on you because ultimately when you rely on yourself you're going to let yourself down a lot. I mean, if you're like me, you've let yourself down many a times, and you're going to question things. And so having that belief, especially spiritual belief, like the Bible for Christianity, for example, it does give you that hope, and it allows you to continue in spite of yourself. And that's really, I mean, as we talked earlier, when you're the loneliness of a leader, you need something to draw on. And, you kind of have like your own personal board of directors with you all the time. You can pick up the word, you can say a prayer. There's a lot of ways that you can reconnect because, again, we can't really do this alone. I mean, I talk about self-leadership, but even self-leadership takes a counsel to help you. And like when you were on that mission on that boat by yourself, ship as you Navy guys call it. Sorry, you needed something, right? Because you didn't have that board of directors, you didn't have immediate peers or people at your rank structure that it would have been appropriate. So, anyways, I do think spirituality is a big part of leadership, and I see so many people these days avoiding it because they don't want to believe in something or they think they're better than that or whatever. So I think you did explain it well. Unless there's anything else you want to add on that, you answered my question for sure.
No, I mean, I could go on and on, but I'm sure we got to keep moving on. So let's keep
Right,
moving.
right, right. Well, as a former chaplain, I would expect you to go on and on about that, but that's great. So the next rhythm. So we'll just move on to the next one, which is the emotional rhythm, and this one also I'm very curious about because emotions are in an earlier podcast I shot, a guy said they're a lot like chocolate, right? You get them and they're gone, and so emotional intelligence. I know you talk about it more in the book, but um, you know if we can't handle our emotions or unprocessed emotions, um, what do you think those do on our leadership decisions and how we are and our effectiveness as leaders?
Well, speaking as a guy, I tend to stuff my emotions. And here I am. I wrote a book that has 3 chapters on emotional rhythms. And so I'm admitting that I stuff my emotions. I have for years, and I still do it some. I've tried to learn how to do it less and less, but it's still there. So it's like, well, I don't want to use a too personal of an analogy, but when we have some kind of an illness that might metastasize, generally, not always, but sometimes doctors can remove the illness. They can remove the cancer, they can remove the tumor so that it doesn't have a chance to metastasize out into our body. But if that, or an abscess in the mouth, if you leave dental work untreated, it will affect the whole of your mouth. Whereas if you have it treated, then you're going to remove the concern from your body, from your mouth, from whatever part of your body it is. So emotions are like that. When we have unprocessed emotions, we might have gotten angry. Grief is an emotion. I mean, you can name any kind of emotion. If you don't process it, or you have emotions from different kinds of challenging experiences. I have I had a couple of toxic leaders that wounded me, and there was one. It was while I was on active duty, and I was very angry for a period of time, and I learned not to let that kind of stuff. I didn't live in that too long, so I had to also be available for people. So I found a supervisory leader, a leader that was of a higher rank in the chaplain world that I could go talk to, and I processed with him the frustration. It was somebody not in my chain that wasn't didn't have any influence on my career, didn't have any influence on anybody else in my environment, who would just listen. And that helped me to set that emotion. Well, it's sort of like I've used this analogy. People walk in and they leave their pain with the chaplain, and then they hand it to the chaplain, and the chaplain takes it and holds it, and then that person leaves, and they leave their pain behind. It's sort of like that with emotions, and you can do that in any number of ways with a friend, or with a therapist, or with the spiritual director, or some kind of counselor, pastor, whatever. But if you don't deal with it, it doesn't go away. It just becomes something else, and that something else is usually something more difficult. It might lead to some kind of failure, and so we have to process our emotions, and that's part and parcel of what I think emotional part of the dynamic of my emotional rhythm section in the book is to talk about ways to process your emotions. I journal, acknowledging even in a private space. Many years ago, my son was born, and he had to spend 21 days in neonatal intensive care. And I'm not a verbal processor. Other people are, but I'm not. And I really couldn't do too much talking about it. So I wrote it, and I spent a lot of time. I posted, people wanted to know, they would ask me, how's your son? How are you guys? And I'm like, I can't keep talking about this. So I just wrote it. And I said, here, this is my heart. This is where I'm at with all these things going on with him. And he's well today, and he's a flourishing adult, and he, obviously lived through that experience. But that was a way for me to process. So that's the key with any kind of emotion, wherever it comes from. It might be a childhood emotion. It might be some kind of an emotional wound. It might be some kind of spiritual abuse, or some kind of experience that you had that's negative in the church setting. Um, these all affect us, and they, even after healing, and I kind of put healing in quotes, they still affect us, but they don't have as much of an immediate impact. When I actually processed grief over my dad dying, it no longer had the power that it had when I wasn't processing my grief over losing my dad. So I still grieve my dad to this day, 20 years later, but it doesn't have the same power that it did in the immediate aftermath of his death. So that's a little bit about emotions.
No, I know. I love your analogy, especially of the medical piece, because so often emotions, they are fleeting, right? It's like the chocolate. They do come and go, good, bad, and different. I mean, you could be on a happy high or depressed low. Um, but I think the real danger, and especially with leadership, if I'm understanding you correctly, is when you don't allow those their moment and you don't
Oh
cut
yeah,
them out of your life and
absolutely.
move on. Right, right. Yeah, because
Yeah.
we can't go around giddy all the time, because if you're at a funeral or something serious, you don't want to be laughing or whatever. So you also don't want to be depressed all the time. But I think dealing with the emotions, and you kind of opened my mind to this kind of thinking. That was a great analogy. So thank you for that. But yeah, to take care of it, because you know whatever happens right now, you've heard of it. Will it matter in 3 minutes, 3 days, 3 years? Use whatever number, whatever duration you want to use. Most of the time, emotions will all pass if we elect them. We can also allow something that happens right now on this podcast to influence us for 30 years if we want. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think you're right that emotions they pass, but if we have unprocessed emotions, they may not be immediate, but they might turn into something that's different. So I have an analogy, and I'm on video, so you can see this analogy. So here's this: my fist is the iceberg. So right up here, that's what you see. What you don't see when you're looking at an iceberg is you don't see all of this down here. And underneath the water level, there's a whole bunch more iceberg, but all you see is this. And the emotions are like that. Unprocessed emotions are down here. But when you process them, they can be released. It's like putting something into the light. If you have a wound, you're going to keep it covered for a while, but eventually you're going to uncover it and let it be exposed to light, and you're going to obviously clean it and all the things that have to happen to heal a wound. But if you don't tend to it, if you don't tend to your emotions, if you don't talk to somebody about your emotions, we're all different the way we process and talk about things. But yes, to your point, they do move on, but depending on the level of pain that they've caused, there probably is something you need to do beyond just letting go of it.
Yeah, that's a very interesting concept that I've never thought of it in the way you did. So, again, thank you. And I'm reading your book, but I haven't gotten to that section yet. So I'm going to look forward to diving in on that a little more and learning more about that, because it's probably something that we can all learn. And again, we don't want any of these blockers in the way we lead, especially the way we lead ourselves. So, very interesting. All right, let's move on to the last one, which I'm also very interested in, the physical rhythm. Yeah. So why do you think physical health is a leadership issue rather than just a personal one?
Well, I think it's both. I think that we if we aren't taking care of ourselves physically, then we're not as effective as we could be as leaders. So, I mean, obviously you all know already I have a military background, but I haven't spent my entire adult life in the military. Um, and I'm in a different phase of my life. And even though the military puts a strong emphasis on it, and it's required to maintain a certain level of fitness and test on it a couple times every year in different ways, um, that's all well and good. It's a structure and it's a requirement. When you're not in most industries, I mean, I have a fireman friend who obviously has some physical requirements that he has to maintain. But many of us live in an environment where we don't have a requirement for. We're not being told we have to stay fit. So why do we stay fit? Why do we stay physically healthy? Well, I think you have to find your inner motivation for it. It's a leadership issue. So directly to your question, it's a leadership issue because if a leader is not taking care of him or herself holistically including their physical, then I wonder what kind of example they're setting for the people that are following them. If the leader's neglecting themselves physically, not everybody's going to have more of a tendency to neglect themselves physically, but at least they're going to have permission, quote unquote, from that leader to not take care of themselves physically. So I think it's a leadership issue because it affects those who you lead, both personally and professionally. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and so it's an example, and I think it just goes to the whole concept of self leadership. This physical health, physical rhythm is one of the things that's really critical. It's just another part of our holistically taking care of ourselves. It's not less important or more important than any other, but it has a critical factor because of the effect that it has both on us and on other people.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a big proponent of that. And I find that the more physically fit you get, the more mentally fit you get. And, leadership's all about showing up. A lot of people say your authentic self or your true self. And the more you're physically able to carry on, especially the stresses of the day or the long hours that may occur, the more you're going to be able to stay that level and probably have more emotional intelligence, be able to relate to people better because nothing's worse than being sick. And one thing I notice all this leadership stuff that's out there, both in the church and academia, rarely, if ever, does anyone ever talk about what are you doing for you? Like you mentioned earlier, your sleep. We know from science that sleep is where your brain recharges. It's where you do some mental cognitive processing. I don't know about you, but when you were writing the book and especially in your dissertation, you probably went to sleep thinking I'm never going to have this concept come together, but you wake up in the morning and it's like a water spigot, right? It was one of my favorite things about my doctoral work was the struggle and then the release. And I tell you what, that release came one of two places. It came as soon as I woke up in the morning or right after I did some kind of run or even a walk or a lifting weights or whatever. It's really, really amazing. Did you have those similar experiences when you were going through all that?
Yeah, I did. It was amazing. I'd wake up in the morning with some kind of idea that it had eluded me the prior day, and I would usually write in the morning, and I'd get to a place. I have about a 90-minute window that I can spend in the intensive work of writing, and concepts would elude me, and then I have a little dog. He's not in my office today, thankfully, because he'd probably be barking if he was. But I have a little dog that my wife and I share, and I've been working from home since I retired from the military. My wife has been working. She's actually downstairs, so she's actually working from home now as she sort of semi-retires. Point is that I was walking him. I'd walk him at lunchtime, and some concept had eluded me in the morning. I was getting frustrated. I'd go out for this walk and I'd watch him. We'd usually go to the park that's a few miles from our house, and he'd run around and he'd explore like dogs do, and it was like he couldn't care less about how long it was taking. He just wanted to explore. He wanted to check what other dogs had been there, where he'd been, and he just wanted to sniff the grass. And we were in nature, and there's trees around us, and the sun's out. Not always. It's out today, but it's really cold out. And then and then an idea, and I would walk silently. When I had these moments where I needed to shake loose something, I would not put a podcast, and I would just walk with my thoughts. And it was amazing. So the same when you said sleep and walking. Walking for me was a way to shake loose some of those difficult concepts that happen in the context of really any form of writing.
Yeah, yeah, it's truly amazing, and it's probably in a sick way what I miss the most. I miss that struggle and that clarity that came with the massive amount of writing that we both did earlier in our lives. And anyways, but physical fitness helps you through that because I mean sometimes you have deadlines, sometimes you got to work up late, yeah, and sometimes you don't get the sleep you want. But the more you build that up in the reserves, I definitely think this is a leadership concept, and I applaud you for writing about it because I do think is one that's often missed. And like I said, of all the elements you picked, that was one of your four, which I think is so valuable there. So no, thank you for that. Is there anything else you want to talk about the rhythms before we kind of wrap this thing up, or
Yeah, I want to go back to I want to give you a quote. I hope you don't mind if I read a quote.
please?
I struggle with defining what soul care is. That's what my book is about. It's about soul care. This is self-leadership, soul care, taking care of ourselves holistically. In a book called From Burned Out to Beloved, Bethany Dearborn Heiser writes this. She says, soul care doesn't just mean spiritual care. So sometimes we correlate soul with spiritual. And yes, the soul is the entity within us, the place within us where God lives. So it is spiritual, but soul care is tending to our inner psycho-spiritual self, which affects our whole self. The Hebrew understanding of the self is holistic, with the body, soul, and spirit being interdependent. We are complex, intertwined beings with our soul, body, mind, and emotions, all amazingly interconnected. So I will give Bethany Heiser some credit as well. She provided that definition, and that helped me to see this as spiritual, physical, emotional, and taking care of ourselves relationally as well. So
No, no, beautiful, beautiful concept,
all work
and
together.
yeah, no, it when once you truly see that, and you know, it's a many parts, but it makes one body, and it makes one person, and you know, that's how we can stop being human doings to human beings. So, kind of on that note, like, what would you recommend to a leader who, you know, wanted to start, you know, leading from within or leading their soul? What would be some first steps that you'd offer for them?
Well, Bobby, you just mentioned one of the keys. Look at yourself as a human being, not a human doing. So we actually are called human beings. So remember that. That's the key. Simple place to start. Just recognize you're a being, not a doing. So I'll give you one quick thing for each of the rhythms. Physical. Well, maybe a couple of things for each. Physical, we've already talked about a lot of this, committing to sleep, going to bed at a consistent time. At my age, especially, I need to make sure I'm stretching, getting some strength exercise, taking time to get some kind of movement, walking or rowing or whatever. Spiritual, commit to a spiritual reading every day. As a Christian, I'm reading the Bible in the morning. It's important to me. And then maybe I'm writing down a few things that come out of that reading. And you might have some spiritual books. You can look at my shelf behind me, and there's all kinds of spiritual books. Pull one off and read it, and maybe make some notes about what you read. Emotional, commit to writing down 3 to 5 things that you're grateful for every morning and every evening. Simple way to navigate your emotions and to maybe turn yourself towards a more positive frame of life. And then relational, schedule a time with a friend. As an introvert, I have to wrestle with this one sometimes. I'm too busy. I got tasks to complete, but I need to schedule time with a friend every night. And then I always try to schedule a date night. It doesn't always have to be out at a restaurant. Oftentimes we do go out, but my wife and I are spending time together, conversing, having dinner together, watching a TV show that we enjoy. We're having a weekly date night. So those are real simple. And maybe having one for all four is too much in your life right now. Just pick one. If you're going to pick one, well, I'm going to say spiritual, but you know, if you're going to pick one, go for a walk every day.
Yeah,
And that can
yeah,
be a place where you get your physical exercise, and you can also have a conversation with God while you're out walking.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Maybe walk with
Yeah,
your wife, and you can have great. So there's one thing, and you can do 4 things in that one activity.
yeah, well, and that you know that's a really good key is like you know so oftentimes when people you know put four things down they're like I don't have time to do four things. Well, you can stack them. I mean, nothing says you can't run and meditate and pray at the same time. Nothing says you can't, you know, talk to a friend and feed your spiritual soul at the same time. I mean, all these things we can do in tandem. And I think the more you practice each one of them, I haven't done it in your manner, so to speak, but you start seeing congruence between these. And so, like, we both talked about how walks were so beneficial to our cognitive ability. Well, a lot of times I like to read a short devotional in the morning and then go do some movement around it, because that's how I process it. And that night might not work for everyone on this that's listening today. Maybe you're someone who has to read and then sit there and think or journal about it or whatever. I don't know what it is, but like start with one. Start with one tomorrow and then see what happens. And then you'll start getting more and more and more. And I think if you're anything like me, Greg, the more you start practicing these kind of like little small disciplines, the more you crave it and the more you need it and the more it just becomes natural and you don't feel like you have to work at it.
Yeah, exactly. It'll iterate over time, and it'll be increasingly maybe not easy, but they'll become more of a habit. They'll start to be ingrained. Um, Atomic habits. There'll be habits that'll be part of your life, and before you know it, they're just there.
Yeah, just small little baby steps. We all want this instant gratification, and instant success takes a long time. And then if you rush it, then we get back to the same do loop we talked about at the beginning of the show, where we get burnout and we get fatigue and we get all these things. So, there's like finding your purpose. Sometimes it takes time. So don't rush anything. But in the absence of while you're waiting for it, don't do anything either. You got to put a little bit of work in, and it will reveal itself. So, and I will tell you, all the listeners, like I said, I began reading this book, Greg, and it is really fantastic. As I told you before the call, the amount of information you put in very short, succinct form is really incredible. And I read a lot of leadership books. If I had my bookshelf behind me, you'd probably see a ton of leadership books there, and yours is very succinct, and it brings new ways of thinking it. And unfortunately, I didn't finish it before this call, so I apologize to you for that, but I will. But so I encourage everyone to read it. But when they do read it and get around to it, what's one takeaway that you'd like everyone to come out with at the end of reading your book?
One takeaway. 221 pages, and I got to narrow it down to one takeaway. One takeaway is flourishing personally and professionally is possible. You must lead yourself with intentional rhythms and practices that are sustainable over the long term.
I love it.
No, you don't have to read. No,
that's probably not going to be good for your book sales there, but no, that is really good. I mean, and I liked what you said, sustainable, because anything that we take on in life has to be sustainable, or else we'll never do it. And that's a good measure. If you're doing too much, make sure you can sustain it every day. Like you said, you read some Bible, you do a little walk or a row or something every day. These are all things you can maintain. You didn't say, I'm reading the entire Bible, I'm running a marathon every day. That's not sustainable for any of us. So taking those baby steps is really important.
Yep.
Greg, I really appreciate you walking us through some of these concepts, and I definitely want to thank you for writing this book. I want to give you the last word. Is there anything else you'd like to wrap up today and tell the listeners?
Yeah, maybe this is a good one of the questions that we reflected on earlier. We didn't talk about it in our podcast, but that you sent as a possibility is a leader that feels successful on the outside but feels empty on the inside. And I think that might be a great way to end.
Okay.
And I want to offer a few thoughts on that. One, the first and most simple thing is you got to stop. You got to take stock of your life. And then here's 3 questions to ask yourself. And this can help you understand why some of these things that I'm talking about in this book are so important. How are your relational connections? And be honest. How are they? If you're a married person, how's the connection with your spouse and your children and perhaps your grandchildren? Take some time to reflect on the things that are most important to you. It's not about, I know I can say this because I'm at this phase of my life. It's not about what other people think of you. It's are you living in accordance with what those that are most important to you and yourself, and depending on your relationship with God think about what is the most important to those, to God and to the people that you love and yourself. And then, are you living in alignment with your best self? There's all kinds of different opportunities for coaching, for spiritual direction. You got to make sure. Part of burnout is not living in alignment with how you're wired. And if you're not living in alignment with how you're wired, you're not gonna be living sustainably, and you're probably gonna feel a little bit empty on the inside, even though you might be performing well on the outside. So that's the way I would That's the way I would wrap up.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, and again, so many of us, myself included, you do seem successful on the outside, but empty on the inside. And my listeners know that's my whole story. That's why I started this whole thing because, like I said earlier, gaining the whole world but losing my own soul. And I can tell you, after 5 or 6 years of being on this path and this journey, I've never been more happy and more in tune with myself. So the relationship with myself has improved so dramatically. I went from someone who I hated myself, didn't even like myself. So I hated myself. I mean, and to today, I'm learning to love myself and love myself more, and not from a selfish perspective, but from, to follow the second of the greatest commandments, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, if I'm going to love you, Greg, if I'm going to love any of you listeners, I've got to first love myself. And you've given us really good 4 elements to hone in on. So your book has a lot of special meaning to me, and I'm sure it will for others. So, Greg, I just want to thank you so much for your time and for writing this and for all you do. And I'm excited to see what your next one is. I'll go ahead and sign you up. I see the look on your face,
Yeah,
like, please don't, Bobby.
there's another
But
in there somewhere, but it might be a while before it comes out. So.
well, yeah, you take a few more walks. It'll work itself out. Get a little sleep tonight. It'll all come out now that I've planted that into your cognitive there. But no, Greg, thank you again. And for all of you who are listening, please go get it. Greg, before I get out of here, tell people where they can find you. Of course, we'll put it in the show notes, but tell people where they can find you and get in touch with you and find your book.
So they can go to gregwoodard.com. Simple. It's my website. There's a link on the top that says book, but they can also go to book.gregwoodard.com, and that takes them directly to the book page. Page.gregwoodard.com is a lead magnet that where I talk about burnout. That it comes, some of the stuff that comes into that manual reflection guide from the book. So, but the best place is gregwoodard.com.
Okay. All right. Well, cool. We'll put it in there. So if you're driving or whatever, you don't have to write it down. We'll just go back and check the show notes, and we'll get you in contact with Greg and where you can get his book. So, well, again, thanks one more time. And for all of you who are listening, I'm Bobby. We talk about self-leadership on this show, and Greg gave us a new perspective, some new things that we can try so we can start leading ourselves better, so we can show up and serve others. Until next time, thank you so much. Have a great week, everyone.